Our next speaker is really difficult. He is a graduate of the University of Michigan medical school, so that's tough enough, but then he also went to Duke for an MBA, so it's like, oh gosh, I can't even hardly stand this. But important for us, since 1998, our next speaker has been a volunteer physician and general surgeon. Now get this list: Haiti, Belize, Guatemala, Brazil, Kenya, Uganda, Ghana, Togo, Benin, Zambia, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Angola, Papua New Guinea, Afghanistan, and Uzbekistan. At the end of December, this was back several years ago, he'd already logged over 1 million miles, making 61 trips, 42 different countries. So I think maybe in terms of medical missions, he's at least seen part of the world and has something to share with us. But knowing Bruce personally, I think he's got a world of experience. So pull out your card and be ready in terms of building your list of axioms. And welcome, Bruce Steffes.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I resonated with many things that Jeff said. And first of all, I sat through his hour of lecture the last time, and he spoke about 4 times faster and didn't get through it. So I was very impressed that he got done in 30 minutes. And then when I was asked to talk about this topic, which is something I've been eating, drinking, and breathing for the last 12 years, I thought, well, maybe I can get something done in an hour, and then I found out it was 30 minutes. So, you know, we're going to be in the same situation here. Just so I kind of understand who the crowd are, I know many of you, but how many are physicians? Okay? How many are nurse practitioners or PAs? Okay? And how many are nurses? Okay? And how many are administrative mission agency kinds of people? Okay, so I've got a clue of where to aim this as we go. No, I wish I had a financial conflict of interest to report to you. One of the things that's important is this concept, and of course we do this in terms of scriptural teaching, but I think it's true in terms of medicine as well. And the things that you've heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, and trust to reliable people who will also be qualified to teach others. I think one of the most important things that we have is the ability to teach others constantly, okay? And it helps you keep from being as paternalistic, and there's some things to do. One of the real issues are, it's like breakfast this morning. My chicken was interested, my ham was committed. And so one of the things that's interesting, I hear people a lot of times say, I'm interested in medical missions, or I'm interested in missions. The question is, are you committed? Has God called you? Are you answering God's call on your life? And the reality of that is that a lot of people have told God at one point or another and they're still not responded appropriately. In 1997, I walked out of my practice. I was the head of a 7-man group. I was actually the CEO or president or head person in 7 different medical companies at the same time. You know, a typical overachiever. But what I had realized is I had achieved success in the world standpoint, but had lost it from a spiritual standpoint. And I had attempted suicide at that point. And in 1997, the Lord called me to quit. And at that time, I had designed the most advanced laparoscopic ORs in the world, and I really thought I was going to buy the company, and that's what I was going to kind of do. But what I really knew was that I was going to do whatever God called me to do. And when I walked out, I had no idea what I was going to do. And I had a phone there, and I literally remember one day saying to God, God, I don't know what you want, but I have a phone, call me. God's got a great sense of humor. I got 3 phone calls in the next 2 weeks from people I hadn't heard of in 20 years, saying, I've heard you retired. How'd you hear that? I hadn't even thought about you. You know, I mean, and I found myself 2,000 miles upstream in the Amazon. I found myself in Uzbekistan, which I had to go look up where that was, you know. And I found myself being called into areas, and over the course of the next year, the business deal disappeared and the missions it was clear that God wanted to do it. So I've been involved with it. And I spent my first 9 years doing the short-term medical missions things. And my real passion, honestly, was for the missionaries, because they are burnt up and chewed out. And they can't really be honest when they come home. And we kind of know that story, and I can talk for hours on that, on the whole support issue. But the reality is that the average life for a medical missionary is only 4.7 years on the mission field. Okay? And it's because of the high stress. And so one of the reasons for us to do this short-term thing is actually to go and take care of the people on the front line. I live at Fort Bragg. I avoided the military because I was in the Vietnam area. I kept my deferment polished. You know, in my little town, they use the draft board as a social engineering tool. If you got caught drag racing or dating the wrong girls or whatever, you found yourself in the Army saluting. So I stayed away from all that. But at Fort Bragg, you know, where we've got all these super soldiers, the reality is the Delta Force and all the things, if it wasn't for the 85% for logistics, they couldn't survive. Because they still have to land, they still have to have bullets, and they have to have food, and they have to have, you know, all the support mechanisms. And so the point is, a lot of times we think that if we're not a goer, that we don't have a job anymore. And the real truth is 85% of the Army is logistics. And so that's where I think we need to go. Let me get back to this concept. Got off a little bit here. So, you know, the point is, if you don't have a passion for doing this, the glamour wears off very quickly, because it's not fun. It was, as Jeff was saying, if you don't have that passion, if you don't understand what your real goal is there, and the verse that actually he didn't mention that makes a big difference for me is, number one, the realization that I am there not to do temporal healing. Now, the nice thing about surgery that's cool is I might heal some kid with God's help, and they might live for 70 years, and that's cool, but if I introduce them to the kingdom, they've got eternal healing. And that's all the difference in the world. It makes up. And sometimes I realize I will sit there with tears running down my face because I've lost somebody, but through that, they've come to know the Lord. And that's the difference. Now, the other verse that I really find very helpful for me is Ephesians 2:10, and it says that we're to do the good works which He has prepared in advance for us to do. So if God is any good at being an advance man, He knows He has sent the buffoon. Okay? And so my real only answer is I got to show up, but I'm not responsible for the results. And sometimes that's the only thing that gets me through the day. That God, I've done my obedient bit, but I don't understand why I'm here, and I don't understand why I'm hurting this bad, and I don't understand why people are dying, but you are the King. The real role is success or significance. Are you going to do it? When I walked out of my practice and started doing this, I took a 95% pay cut. That will get your attention. But it turns out that Jehovah Jireh stuff, turns out He means it. What a concept. And it's amazing what God can do. I'm still too fat, I'm still paid too many property taxes. He's still too good for me. Okay? The reality is we don't need to guard our knowledge. I don't care who you are. You can teach your specialty 90% of it to anybody. Okay? And that may be something that'll make a difference. Keep that in mind. It's education that's the most important gift that we can give. And the other reality, we were talking in a discussion earlier about how so many mission agencies are seeing their people being sent home. They can't survive in these areas because of visas and, you know, rules and regulations and all that other things. But the reality is I can, as a medical educator, get into any country in the world. And so this is probably the rising part of medical missions, and I think that's an important concept. Now, I will tell you that having been involved with this for 20 years, I've watched a lot of people do it poorly. They're not prepared. If you don't prepare, you are going to fail. Okay, and so it takes a lot of things, and you're going to come in, and you may interrupt age-old cultural issues, and we do need to do it within the sensitivities of the culture and the peoples. But it will change things. You're going to have to be prepared for that as well. And it's a long, long horizon, especially with education. If you're not there 5 to 10 years, you're really not going to make the difference that you want to make. So it takes a long time. What global medicine is not, and I see this all this time, it's not an adventure or experience or a merit badge or, gee, I've gone to all these countries and isn't that wonderful? It's not medical tourism, you know, where you go and you do 30 or 40 cases, you come back and you say, look at these weird things that I've done, isn't this wonderful? That's not the point. It's not a few medical papers. It's not some way to advance your career. It needs to be done because you are serious. Now, a couple of months ago, I was talking at the global medicine seminar that I had up at Harvard, and Robert Riviela, who's another surgeon and a great believer, we had this interesting conversation over the lunch with the students, and they were 350 of some of the best and the brightest there. And they were shocked to find out they weren't going to have a job, okay? There's nobody that's going to pay you to do this, okay, when you come out on this, because it doesn't make money for anybody. And so other than a few NGOs, so you have to kind of go into this with an idea of how you're going to do this. And of course, the best option, if you're serious about global medicine, is actually faith-based organizations, because we still have this mission thing going on. But if you're not a believer, you actually struggle with that, trying to figure out how you're going to fit in. There are a few NGOs that will hire, but you almost never get to take care of patients. You're always at some other higher level. One option that goes on, and I know a few of them around the world, where you actually work at the university in those developing worlds, so you're involved with education that way. You can actually do universities here in the developed world. I just realized there was a typo there. In the developed world and go overseas, but that never quite works very well because, again, nobody wants to pay you to do that. The other thing is, how can I work, if God's called me to intermittent short-term medical missions, how do I make a living for that? The VA happens to actually be a good system for that because they're already set up for eighths. You can go work for 4 eighths or 5 eighths or 6 eighths and spend the rest of the time overseas. Very, very hard to find a private practice that's going to have enough people in the same agreement with that. So looking at some of these, in the low to middle income countries, the NGOs, there's a very limited number of jobs. You don't have patient care. Often they wish to, for political reasons, hire the nationals. And if you're the only person working in that group, you're spiritually isolated and culturally isolated, so that's a little difficult. Also, job insecurity. If you work in the universities, again, they'll be glad to have you, but they would rather hire their own peoples as well. Often that's subject to the government, and you know whether they're going to have money to pay you at all next month is always a question when you're working in these countries. You've got all sorts of politics you're under no control. One of the things that's very frustrating is that the resources are so limited. When I was on staff at the university in Kampala, if we could do 1 case a week, that was considered a really good week because just everything kept falling apart. And again, the spiritual isolation. You can work here in the university and go overseas and make your career as global surgeons, but of course the reality is they're not going to pay you to do that. So you're going to have to arrange some sort of schedule in which you're willing to get paid less in order to go. There is a present emphasis on global surgery because it's so sexy, but that doesn't mean money follows it. They just want the credit. So actually they're willing to hire you at 3/4 just so they can get the credits out of it, but they're not going to help you as a general rule. Sorry, something skipped there. The VA, I already mentioned. Private practice, again, hard to find people of like mind. There are Christian medical programs that are out there that are exciting. This is actually one of the biggest draws for people coming out now who want to go to the mission field. When I started with Christian Medical and Dental's Continuing Medical Education Conference, we have these conferences every other year, one time in Africa, one time in Thailand, and on either side in the surgery, everybody kind of laughed at the surgery because there were 6 of us. You know, there just weren't any surgeons to speak of. Last time I was just in Greece, there were 70-some people in the room, and it all had to do with the Pan-African Academy of Christian Surgeons and this training aspect. So it's a real exciting possibility. There are national training programs. There are actually programs that are run as Christian institutions. There's one in family practice in Nigeria and one in the DRC that is trying to get going. There's an interesting philosophical issue that you have to decide. Are you going to train only Christians, or are you going to try to use this as a discipling tool to nationals? But I'll tell you that's a significant changes the philosophy of everything you do, depending on how you do that as well. So, for example, right now the Pan-African Academy of Christian Surgeons, we'll talk about that briefly. There's the family practice program that's just started, In His Image. has done this. So let's talk briefly about each. Briefly about each of those. The Pan-African Academy of Christian Surgeons was founded in 1996. And that was Dave Thompson in Gabon, who just basically said that I can't get anybody to replace me, and so I need to train somebody. And of course, mission hospitals have always tried to train somebody to do hernias and C-sections just so you can sleep through the night. You get hammered being on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, kind of thing. And so he brought that, and you remember the story of the little red hen. Everybody wanted to eat the bread, but nobody wanted to do the work. So there were 10 institutions that got together and said it's a great idea, and Dave would found himself by himself training this. And this was done with many flaws of the kind of thing that we've actually discussed already this morning. They were out in the middle of nowhere. They're 4 hours further into the rainforest than Schweitzer's hospital at Lomarini. And so he could start this kind of thing without any government supervision to speak of, which was probably not appropriate. But the reality was we kind of in the mission hospital want that because the governments kind of tend to screw us up as a regular basis. So there was this decision, and we started training. With time, our graduates got so good that people began to ask, where did you get your training? And so then we had to spend the next 10 years asking for forgiveness as opposed to asking for permission. And God has been good and gracious. As of this coming January, we will have 97 residents in training. We will be in 15 programs at that point. We just added 4 as I had to look the total up. And we're in 9 countries in Africa. And what's really exciting about this is that the College of Surgeons of East and Central and South Africa, who are kind of the board agency, and the American College all wrapped up together, has looked with great favor upon PACS. And so what's exciting is that we're actually influencing the surgical education for 10 countries and 500 million people. And it's all for God's glory. And that's the part that's really exciting about this. Now, surgery in Africa, his comment earlier about the anesthesia, absolutely 100% true. There are entire countries that don't have an anesthesiologist. I'm leaving for Togo Monday. I forgot what today was. I'm leaving Monday for Togo. Anesthesia in Togo has a 2% mortality rate. Okay? It's just tragic. And so there's lots to be done with this. The Christian Academy of African Physicians is something that's just started recently, based on Bruce Stallman's work at Cabaret University, and they're trying to put together kind of a PACS equivalent in family practice, and are working on this. They're just getting that started. We would love, for example, at every one of our PACS programs to have a family practice program at the same time, because I think there's some synergies that work there. We'd love to have that happen. In his image, they have made the decision to not train just Christian physicians. All the other 2 programs that we've already mentioned, those are all Christians. They've decided to work with secular groups, so they're in Mongolia and Afghanistan and the Horn of Africa and a few other places, trying to get this going. And so there's those kinds of options. And with that, there are a few occasional scattered programs around where people are training, but we've run out pretty shortly at that point. So that's the reality there. The questions you have if you're going to start this program is it takes a lot longer than you think it's going to do. It takes more work than you think it's going to take. And it's going to take more people than you think, and it's going to take more money than you think. And other than that, it's pretty much straightforward. So one of the real issues you have is who's actually going to control it, who has the best understanding, and usually it's some sort of partnership. Finances are an issue. For example, for our PACS residents, $25,000 a year, and we have to raise every bit of that money for every resident. So that it's an issue for us. There are infrastructure issues. This afternoon in the surgery section, we're going to talk about this whole idea of safe surgery. Well, in order to get our programs approved by the colleges of surgeons, they come in and they have certain criteria. And you can argue whether that's appropriate in that culture or not, but nonetheless, we have to meet those things. And so, every hospital that we bring a PACS program in, it costs us between $250,000 and $500,000 just to build the infrastructure up to the level where it should be. And even then, that's debatable. We've also found it takes more faculty than you think if you're going to be serious about doing a true residency as opposed to an apprenticeship. An apprenticeship is somebody just learns what I know. That's not the same thing as assessments and standards and tests and all that other thing. So that's an issue. And then this major philosophical issue about Christians. So, one of the big questions if you're thinking about this is, How well are you going to do this? The reality is, unfortunately, that we as Christians do a lot of really poor quality work, and we blame Christ for it, okay? And so one of the issues is, how excellent are we going to be? Now, you always have this constant balance between good enough and excellence. If it's good enough today, that's the best we can do, and it's acceptable, but we want to get to this excellent point, because again, it's Christ's name that we are doing all of this. Developing curriculums can be difficult, and of course, you can't just take a Western curriculum and slap it down in the middle of Africa or South America, because there's different diseases, different conditions, etc. And the time horizon, as we mentioned, is always longer than you expect. Here's the kind of thing that I really want to talk about as much as anything, is the preparation. Surgeons are notoriously patient sorts of people. You know that, of course. And so as soon as they're done with their residency, they want to be on the mission field the next day, okay? And that doesn't really work very well. We have not prepared adequately for this situation, and this is one of the things that with PACS we're struggling with. One is, it's just professional. Are you adequately trained? And coming out of your specialty here in the United States, no matter what it is, whether it's family practice or medicine or whatever, you are not qualified to practice in the developing world. You're going to have a significant learning curve, however you're going to resolve that. So number one, you have to address those issues. And best, perhaps have a mentor or someone who's actually going to go. We've made a lot of mistakes taking single people and sticking them out in the middle of nowhere and say, God will protect them. Well, what we've done is we've burned them out. It doesn't work right. It's not right. From a spiritual standpoint, you have to be right personally. You know, the truth is, when we come out of our training programs, we often have not taken the time to, our relationship with God is not as tight as it should be. So that's one issue. Secondly, from a theological standpoint, I'm fascinated that people are coming out and they're from X background and they're going to work with X denomination, and they're shocked that the X denomination wants them to believe the same way, okay? And so, you know, one of these things is you have to make sure that that makes some sense. I say this tongue-in-cheek, I don't mean to be offensive to anybody, but a lot of times non-denominational means I don't know what I believe. And so, you know, one of the things that's very important is to have a true systematic theology so that you have a understanding of the scriptures that works for you. And of course the other thing is, what is your missiologic teaching? What do you understand? What do you assume missions to be? How is that going to be affected? You know, the perspectives course at a bare minimum is at least gives you a chance to go through those kinds of things. We often don't prepare people cross-culturally. They have 5 hours of lecture on one day, and now we're ready to send them into the fray. That doesn't work so well. People go in, they want to be academicians, but they've never lectured in their life. So there's pedagogical things, and particularly if you're going to run a residency, understanding how you handle it. You know, what do you do with a bad resident? What do you do with some disaster? Those kinds of things. And then there's a whole rash of personal issues and skills that have come into that as well. It's actually hard to get prepared. Now, if you wait until you're prepared, you'll never go. But I think we need to work better at that. As was mentioned earlier, any additional skill you have, okay? My wife is an accountant. Now, in every mission conference that you've ever been to, and they ask for people to consider dedicating themselves to missions, it's always the big 5 or 6, right? It's an airplane pilot, it's a nurse, it's a preacher, it's a translator, it's maybe a seminarian, you know. I rarely have seen the accountants go, yeah, I'm going. You know, it doesn't happen. The truth is, in every hospital I've ever been in, they don't much care if I come back, but they want her to come back because they need the accounting more than they need anything else. So the point is that any skill, I have people ask me all the time, you know, well, I'm interested in, you know, becoming a specialist. Well, the answer is, I think God gives us our gifts and our interests because He wishes us to enjoy them, okay? However, you also have to understand that it may be that your gifting or your skill is what you're going to lay on the altar of sacrifice in order to follow Christ. My gifting is technical surgical stuff. I'm so good I hope I never die. But the point is, when I had to do what I was doing for the last 20 years, that's what I had to lay on the altar. Because in order for me to do what God wanted me to do in that situation, it wasn't the fun stuff, it was the other stuff that was important. And so, the truth is, God may be well calling you to be a specialist in the right ear. But on the other hand, you may not be able to practice that in much of the mission world. You may have to put that on the altar in order to do these other things as well. Desperately, anesthesia, everything, any surgeon, anybody who knows which end of the knife is sharp can be of help. And that's true for just about any other specialty as well. Tropical medicine, I would tell you that most of you shouldn't go without a true course in tropical medicine. There are a couple of great online courses in West Virginia, Minnesota, Tulane, or you can spend the time and a little bit more money, go to Liverpool or Brussels. But the point is that everything is tropical medicine, and so please do that as well. Board certification. I see missionaries all the time. The Lord has called me to go to the mission field, and I just can't wait to be board certified because I'm going to be there forever. Probably not, okay? And when you come back, you're not qualified to practice in this country either, okay? So again, if you're going to go there, in Christ's name, be the best you can be, and then come back. And it's fascinating to me is that a great number of missionaries coming back, a couple of whom are in this room right now, they actually end up in medical education because we have an interest in people and souls that like it, and a lot of them end up being program directors in that situation. So take care of yourself professionally as well. You never know when God's going to call you back. We talked about subspecialization. Personally, learn to cook, okay? You can't live your whole life eating peanut butter and toast. And that's true spiritually as well. You've got to be able to feed yourself. Because in a lot of these places, actually one of the greatest issues is there is no pastoral influence for you. And there's not anybody who's going to feed you. So learn how to cook as well. Learn how to mentor other people, how to take care of them. Stay focused. And CMD has some great programs there that we'll talk about. Theologically, I think one of the things that's important is you do have to have a basic understanding of theology. So maybe an Old Testament survey that you take online, or a New Testament survey, or systematic theology, or something, so that you can go with a little bit more sense. I don't think you have to be a seminarian, but sometimes you may do that just for fun. Missiologically, again, having the very minimum in my mind would be something like the Perspectives course, but there are other courses out there that to be ready. I'm coming up to the end of my time. You must stay related to your local church. A lot of times as we come with our residency, we've bopped around between churches and we don't have a group of people that we really have as a local church. And we actually, those of you in mission agencies know that sometimes people can't be accepted because they honestly don't have a local church. So staying involved with a group of people who care about you, who pray with you, who will take care of you, is a critical aspect as well. Cross-culturally, again, there are ways to do that. I will tell you, if you're there 40 years, you'll still be surprised tomorrow by some cross-cultural thing that you never saw coming. But on the other hand, if you've at least prepared for it, at least when it hits you, you say, yeah, I should have known about that. And it doesn't strike you and it doesn't get down to your basic soul, which can be a problem. Learn how to teach. And there are options there. One advantage I actually recommend, for at least for our surgical people or people that will be going out under family practice, is take that extra year of fellowship before you go. I know World Medical is glad to send you right away, but take that extra year and get a position in an academic position situation. And even though we know that's the assistant clinical subpar janitor and assistant professor, it actually plays very, very well in Africa or in Asia. And it's a way to have a lot of advantages from an academic standpoint, that you have some contacts that you have. Most importantly, God does not call one half of a unit. Your spouse must be on board, and if they are not, don't go and think that they're going to somehow get a call over there. That is probably one of the leading causes for people, families, units to come back. So prepare for your whole family to minister. Don't skip the language part. The point is I'm putting them under general anesthesia so I don't have to talk to them anyway. Yeah, that's not quite true. Get the language. The other thing is, as you're preparing, as you talk to students, live within your style. We expect pastors and missionaries to live at a non-cultural lifestyle level, at a low level, but you know, the reality is that medical students that are coming out of medicine, God bless them. But the average medical student coming out owes $250,000, okay? Some of which they could have helped. And so living a style that will prepare you is important. The other thing to realize that you have to think about is, am I working under the hospital? Who runs the project? And is that going to be compatible for me? Raising support for medical missionaries is not very hard, okay? It's not very much fun for a lot of us, but it's not hard. They're so shocked that you greedy people would actually go do something, they'll write a check, okay? And the other thing is that God is perfectly willing to sell one of the cattle on 1,000 hills if you'll obey Him. So that Jehovah Jireh, He means it. So that's really not an issue, and there's lots of help with that. Do spend some time with your sending agency. Make sure that they're capable of bailing you out. If you need to be bailed out, they can get you out of the country, that they have member support, that they have all the things that you need. These are some of the kind of the issues that you talk about. I mentioned down here, I have a template of questions with PACs. We don't send anybody. They don't belong to us. But we've come up with a series of questions that the people going out should ask of their agency to help you find which one will work for them. So, a couple of things. My email is bruce@brucesteffes.net. I've got 2 books I'll send you for free on cross-cultural and short-term medical stuff that we wrote, all the things that we ran into and knocked us for a loop and tried to come up with an answer. And if you ask for it, I'll also send you this template of questions. I'd be glad to do that as well. This may be the most important. You all know C.T. Studd, part of the Oxford group in the missionary, he said, the romance of a missionary is often made up of monotony and drudgery. There's often no glamour in it. It doesn't stir a man's spirit or blood. So don't come out to be a missionary as an experiment. It's useless, it's dangerous. Only come if you feel you'd rather die than not come. And don't come if you want to make a great name or want to live long. Come if you feel there's no greater honor after living for Christ than to die for Him. And you have to understand, 7 out of the 8 people that went with Him died within 6 months. So this was a very serious situation. And fortunately, we do better than that nowadays. But the reality is, are you interested or are you committed? And that's the question for you. Medical education is a phenomenal paradigm. I'm glad to talk to you about that or 1,000 other things that I may have brought up here. But my real passion at this point in my life is taking care of the missionaries in the mission hospitals and working with the surgery residents. It's just fascinating to pour your life into them. It's God's responsibility. He may be sending a buffoon, but He's there. And I get to sit at the feet of the great physician. Thank you.